the dream job for anyone is one where you like the ultimate impact that your work will have, and you feel like the stuff you're doing day to day, you might be kind of uniquely suited for. And I felt the first part. I liked the impact I was having, but I felt like you could drop any person with the right education sort of into my seat in that job.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast where I bring you the best and the brightest in the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Folks, my guest today, Joelle Emerson, is the co-founder and CEO of Paradigm. She partners with leaders of some of the world's most innovative companies to consult and advise on workplace culture strategies. She has written extensively about diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias, something I love to talk about. And her work has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, the Harvard Business Review, Fortune, and on the cover of The Atlantic. Kudos to that. Before founding Paradigm, Joelle was a civil rights lawyer, and her legal background highlighted the consequences that can result from companies failing to consider diversity and inclusion early, and inspired her to found Paradigm. This is going to be a good one. Joelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to chat today.
This is awesome. So you have a pretty incredible background, and we're going to get to that whole story in a minute. But I love to know the origin story. What would your parents do for a living? Were they attorneys? How'd you get into How'd you go down the legal route?
No, I was the first in my family to take that path. And then my older brother was inspired. He followed in my footsteps. But no, my mom was an elementary school teacher. And my dad did a range of different jobs when I was growing up. He dabbled in real estate, which is what he continues to do now. He worked for city planning, did a bunch of different stuff. So the legal background was, I guess, something I came up with all on my own. But I think something that was very consistent throughout my childhood and shows up with each of my siblings in very different ways is just this idea that part of your job on this earth is to figure out your unique, special way to make things a little bit better and leave the world better than you found it. So that was a big, big part of my upbringing.
Was there something going on? Was there injustice? I mean, why civil rights? What led you down that path?
Yeah, I don't think, I'm always impressed when I hear people talk about their career paths and it's so obvious and linear. Mine was not that way. I think it was a little bit more like each one thing led to the next, which led to the next, which led me here, a lot more like a jungle gym than a ladder, probably. But the sort of, I think, initial impetus to go to law school was a not so great story, which was the summer after my freshman year of college. I was on a study abroad trip. And I was sexually assaulted, which is obviously, horrible, horrible thing to have happen. And as bad as that was, the sort of months and years following where I tried to pursue justice, and this was in a foreign country, were just like far, far more traumatizing, I think, than the actual event itself, where at every turn, there was just no justice to be found. And I was blamed, and it was about what I was wearing that night, and just all the sort of like tropes that you hear.
Right.
And I had all of the support in the world. I had the most supportive parents. I had resources to hire my own attorney. I had all of the things, and it was still just impossible to navigate. Meanwhile, I was back at college. I was on a scholarship. I had to take a reduced course load. And then there was like a time where it was unclear if my scholarship was going to be under threat. And I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. And so as a person that had sort of all of the sort of emotional support and resources available, navigating sort of the legal and administrative system was so overwhelming. I just barely made it through. And it just kind of made me realize that sort of at, people's worst moment in life, it's sort of whether you have good support that is probably determinative of whether you're going to make it through or not. And so that was the point where I wanted to be a women's rights lawyer. And I decided I wanted to sort of engage in litigation and advocacy, really focused on violence against women. And that's what I spent the rest of my time in college doing. Was very, very focused on that. And then through a series of sort of different internships and different experiences, I broadened my aperture a little bit. But that's really kind of what set me off on this path.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for sharing such a vulnerable and personal story. We can't, some chapters we write for ourselves and some are just written for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, would it is always funny to think about like how you've gotten, where you are and what might have happened otherwise. And I'm so grateful to be where I am. But yeah, I couldn't have really quite predicted this path.
It's different chapters, different seasons, whatever analogy you want to make, which you got there. So how long were you practicing before the pivot? And we're going to get into the pivot in a minute.
Briefly. Yeah, very briefly. So spent, so in law school, did different internships, different things, and sort of kind of came to the realization I started out focusing on violence against women, and then I got opportunities to do different types of civil rights work and started interacting with employment as an area I got really interested in. It was my second summer of law school, and the timing of my internship at a civil rights law firm just worked so that I got to actually participate in a trial, which is really a rare thing to get to do. And what I sort of saw representing these plaintiffs who had been discriminated against and retaliated against was sort of a similar thing in a totally different way to what I had experienced, which is like, if you don't have a job where you are treated fairly and you experience respect, the ripple effects of that into your life are just substantial. And so you think about education, you think about employment, you think about housing, there are these key areas of safety, there are these key areas of your life where if those things aren't in order, it's sort of very hard to construct the rest of your life. And so I got really passionate about this access to like fair, decent employment. And so after law school, I clerked for a couple of years, worked in federal courts, sort of helping learn about sort of what law actually looks like in practice, which is not so much what you learn in law school.
Oh,
And
I know firsthand. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So did that, and then I ended up in a fellowship program where I was sort of primarily focused on litigation, representing plaintiffs in discrimination and retaliation cases, and doing some policy advocacy, drafting state laws. Here in California, focused on equal pay, for example. And it was my dream job. It's what I really went to law school, to do, was to get there aren't that many civil rights litigation jobs coming out of law school. I got my dream job. And then pretty quickly into the course of doing that work, I would say like months, I started to feel like something was off. Like I was always coming in at the end of the life cycle of a problem. I was always fighting with companies where things had gone wrong. And it felt like that specific sort of tool for change was also not leveraging the things I feel like I'm good at.
And that's where opportunity comes from. Where you see what if we were proactive instead of reactive about this? What if there was an opportunity to go in and consult and stop problems before they happen? Think about the cost savings and legal fees, litigations, payouts, all the stuff that comes along with that. So you saw the opportunity where you could leverage your skills and experience. Is that where
Yeah,
the first kernel of
that's
paradigm came from?
exactly. And I think it was also just good timing because so I'm based in the Bay Area, kind of pretty involved in the kind of world of tech. And it was sort of right around the time, this is maybe 11 and a half years ago or so, where technology companies were starting to have a different kind of conversation about organizational culture broadly and diversity specifically, but culture broadly than I had ever heard before, which was this idea that culture could be seen as a predictor of business success, not like orthogonal to it. So you started to see, a lot of technology companies were competing with each other on culture and
Perks.
talent, perks, all of
Yeah.
these things that fall under this bucket of like, if we can build a better culture, maybe we can build a better business. And I thought, if some companies, even some companies think that's true, if we could help them do that, and we could help them do that in a way that works for everyone, that unlocks potential across anyone that you might hire, or that is attractive to all people, what might that enable? And so that was really kind of what got me thinking that maybe there was a different way for me to have an impact.
I want to dig into this, but I want to talk about the actual pivot. Was there a walk away moment, an aha moment where like, hey, I'm going to go down this path where I can still leverage my skills, but I'm probably going to move away from a practicing day-to-day attorney.
It was so stressful. It was like a multi-month.
Like all that time
There
and
were
money and all the,
whiteboards.
just all
Yes,
the investment.
it was so hard. So first, it was the realization that probably practicing law was not where I could have most impact. I kind of felt in my day-to-day. So I think the dream job for anyone is one where you like the ultimate impact that your work will have, and you feel like the stuff you're doing day to day you might be kind of uniquely suited for. And I felt the first part. I liked the impact I was having, but I felt like you could drop any, a person with the right education sort of into my seat in that job, and they would have probably done just about as good of a job as I was doing. And I felt like I've got some things that I think I'm pretty good at that I'm not using in this job. And that feels like a wasted opportunity.
Right. It's that Venn diagram where passions, interests, and skills all kind of intersect.
Totally. It's
So
that.
let's go back. I want to go back 11 years. We're talking tech at that point, and there's a balance of especially in the Silicon Valley tech world over there and the East Coast here in New York, of this bro tech culture, right? It was very bro heavy. And a lot of companies, I know I was working with them when I'm a recruiter by trade. So I started working with these companies, and they threw around this term culture fit.
Yeah.
And it is my least favorite word on the planet. Well, I have a lot of other words that I hate, but that are in the professional category. There's other words I hate much more than that. But this idea of fit, and fit in that sense, meaning everyone looks the same, sounds the same, talks the same. Basically, it's a like bias. You're literally hiring people based on hey, I like this person. And then when people start to throw around, hey, do I think I could have a beer after work with this guy or gal? Or the other one I love, if I was stuck at the airport for 3 hours, 5 hours, in a delay, would I lose my mind with that person? I go, this is not, fit is not the right word. If you're really trying to build a culture, you want culture diversity. You want diversity of mindset. Yes, you want people's values aligned, in my opinion. Values, good people. But you want different perspectives. You want different backgrounds. That's how you make, otherwise you just have a company of yes people that all look and sound the same.
And your examples of would I want to grab a beer with this person or be stuck in an airport? I mean, we literally saw, as I'm sure you have, time and time again, that was actually how people were trained to hire for, quote unquote culture fit. It was, do I like this person? And, first of all, that's a really bad way to hire for just competence. It's a great way to get a lot of people who have similar personalities. But what we know is that people who have different personalities are going to see things differently. But to your point, what we would always, and this was really big in our work when we got started, what we would always help companies figure out is, how do we make sure that we're correctly articulating whether it's our values or working principles, things that are sort of not non-negotiables for working here? And then how do we go assess for those? Because sometimes in culture fit interviews, I think that's what people thought they were doing, but they weren't using the kind of structure and rigor that actually produces that outcome. But I do think you need people, to your point, like you are, filtering people in and out based on values alignment. And that's healthy, but that's very different than, do I want to grab a beer with this person?
Right. I mean, it's very simple. Like, I mean, I've talked to hundreds of leaders, and it's really like they kind of boil it down to a no assholes policy. But how could you really tell if someone's an asshole on an interview? Because you're performing, and some people are really good at interviewing. They say what you want to hear. They act like they the way you want to hear. And then when the rubber hits the road, when they start, it's a bit of a gamble. But
which is why interviews are not very predictive of performance in a role. They're,
no, it's archaic to some point.
Yeah, it is. And so one of the big things we helped a lot of our clients do in the early days is, build out structured interviewing processes that got closer to approximating what real work looks like in a role, that got closer to assessing for values. If you actually can have the right type of structured, values focused interview question, there isn't one clear right answer that a good interviewer could just knock out of the park. And you're actually, assessing. There are many different ways someone might answer this question, but the people that thrive most here are going to answer it in this type of way.
And it goes the other way too. I saw, it was probably a couple of months ago, it was a job ad for a tech company, and they were very straightforward. They said, this job is not for you if you're here for the 9 to 5. If you have a problem working weekends now and then. They were very upfront. Like, we're early stage, we're in total grind mode. Like, they were upfront about that. And the amount of positive reviews, in my opinion, as a recruiter, were so overwhelming. It was transparency. It was like, thank you for knowing what you want and being upfront with the people that, like, this is who we are right now. These are the type of people that we need. And here's the carrot at the end of the stick.
Yeah.
The equity and the pay, like being upfront about it.
I think being upfront, being clear, being transparent, and also just but also sense checking yourself to make sure that really is what you need, that you're not, missing something. I don't know, but things have changed so much. When we got started, whatever it was, 10 and a half years ago, we would routinely see job descriptions that used he, like the ideal candidate, blah, 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 he will, blah, 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 in tech.
Simple things.
I don't see that anymore with at least US based companies. But I think the challenges have gotten a lot more subtle. But yeah, when we got started, the kind of bro culture was not even all that implicit. It was explicit.
Interesting. So going back to that pivot, were your parents supportive?
Oh, yes, my parents are supportive of anything I could tell them I
What
want to do or be anything. They
it
would
could go
be
either way, right? Like, we invested all this time and money. You were going to be this big lawyer, and now what are you doing? You're starting a company. What was all that for? All that years of
no, all the
schooling?
law school debt was mine to pay, so they were good. No, they were super supportive. They were really excited, and I think had I not lived in the Bay Area where there is such a sense that where risk taking really is encouraged. I think a lot about had I just moved somewhere else after I
Hmm.
graduated law school, had I not been connected to the sort of tech and startup ecosystem through my then partner, now husband. I knew a lot of founders where sort of the worst case scenario of failure just didn't seem that bad. That seemed like something that happens all the time. It's hard for me. I'm sort of I guess, recovering like perfectionist. And so the idea that I could do this and I could fail and then will I be totally unemployable? Like what would I do? What would I do next? And I
No, you
think
had a
it was,
safety net.
yeah, I think the biggest safety net was the vibe of the technology community that just has a very powerful sort of mantra of like failure is just a part of
Well,
doing cool stuff.
failure's growth, right? Like, you have to break
Totally.
things. You have to break things, and once you embrace that, and I mean, that changed a big time for me. Like when I went out on my own, I've been in business for myself 9 years, almost coming upon 9 years, and it's like the idea of failing means as long as you're making progress and you're learning from it, and you're not repeating those mistakes. Like that's the key. If you keep repeating the same mistakes, that's
Yeah.
not growth. That's a tough one.
Everything you just said is like something we actually do coach our clients on a lot, but it's sort of this idea of growth mindset. And that is something I believe in very much, but it's taken me a long time to develop. And there's nothing like being a founder, I think, to force you to have that because you are going to fail repeatedly.
So you went out and you launched this consultancy. What was maybe that first, bump in the road, or dare I say, like punch in the face business wise, where you had this hypothesis, you're really excited about something, like we're going to go out with this offering, and maybe that's not what the market wanted.
Oh
Like
my
had
gosh. It was
I
like
love to talk about the
that was
first big
all the
failures.
time. I'll give you a couple. I mean, yeah, I feel like the last decade and a half, it's always a roller coaster. It's a story of trying things
Yep.
and failing and trying more things. I think so. One was something comes to mind as something we tried with an organization, and one was just like a personal sort of, failure or challenge. But I remember one of the first tech companies we worked with, it was at that time private, high growth, Silicon Valley darling tech company growing really, really quickly. And they brought us in to look at their hiring process and to figure out how could we help them hire more people from underrepresented backgrounds. In that case, it
Mm.
was primarily looking at their funnel women and people of color. They were hiring a lot of white, to a lesser extent, Asian men. And so we looked at their hiring process, and our big thing early on was how do we use more data-driven and evidence-based practices? How
Hmm.
do we actually like look at your hiring funnel, see the specific point at which people are falling out of that funnel, look at what you're doing there, try to close those gaps through
Data tells the
research-based
story. Yep.
practices. It does, and it was pretty clear, right? And so it was clear where they had opportunity to improve when we had all these. I have two co-founders, and we had all these sort of, and they have much more background in research and data than I do. So we designed all these interventions to make this process more fair, to make it more structured. Some of the things we talked about earlier, reduce some of the reliance on culture fit. And we were so confident that this would work. And we spent a lot of time on it. This would work to close the gaps. Fast forward a couple months, which is what we needed at the rate they were hiring to see if these gaps
Right.
closed. And we weren't seeing really much impact at all. And it was really humbling in our early days because we really had a lot of confidence that we could come in and show these companies what was what and help them. And we had designed practices that were super research based, really should have worked. And then when we started to take a look at the interviewer like packets, what was actually happening, what were the feedback interviewers giving, and we saw, oh, people are not using any of the new process we rolled out. We had
Mm.
these great ideas of what people should be doing. We rolled those ideas out, but nobody's using them. Why? They're probably a little bit harder and they take longer. And these interviewers have been interviewing for a couple of years and they think they know what they're
They
doing.
think they know. They think they have it figured out.
Totally. And I in particular have sort of been, I think, continually behind the ball on the importance of change management. And you can have the best systems and processes and structures in mind, but if you don't get people bought into those things,
No.
they're not going to use them. And so that was
It's
one of like a very early learning for us, which is, people always like poo-poo the idea of training. And I get why, training sounds kind of like,
boring. You're pulling them
what's
away
that
from
going to do? Boring.
is this revenue
But
generating, right?
exactly. But what and so did I at that time. I was like, it's all about systems and processes. But what I learned then is whether you call it training or not, if you don't get people on board with whatever it is you're trying to do, bring people along, show people why it's going to be better for them, people aren't going to do it. And so then we had to go back to spend some time with the recruiting team and hiring managers and everyone really involved in interviews and talk to them about how you get more predictive outcomes in hiring. Some of them probably cared a lot about diversity. I don't know that it was like the top concern for most of them, but what they all really cared about was hiring the best person. So we talked to them about the research on how structured interviewing leads to much more accurate outcomes and all these things. And, guess what happened? Finally, it actually worked and people started to use those strategies and we started to see those gaps close. But it was a key learning for me that it's a lesson I've had to learn, unfortunately, a few times, that having the most brilliant ideas and executing them flawlessly doesn't make any difference at all if people don't then engage with what you're trying to get them to do.
And it starts at the top, and I think it starts with aligning with the right clients too, where it's not just performative and they're doing it for the board or the shareholders to say we're doing it, and we're not just bringing in these consultants, but they're bought into it.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't start at the top, where the leaders are saying, we're doing this initiative, we believe it's going to make a big difference, and we're going to give you the time and carve out the time. It won't be held against you. It won't be held against your metrics for you to fully embrace this. The second part of that, and I've learned this by immersing myself in this industry, is the power of structured interview process. There's so many companies I work with that is so haphazard. They have zero process. And it's this candidate met with the CEO once and they hired him, and this person for the same role had to go through 4 people just because the CEO was out of town and they didn't get your mind is boggling.
Yeah.
But a structured interview process allows for if we're looking at fair and equitable, everyone has a fair amount of opportunities to interview with the same people, be judged or graded or scored, however way you want to call it, in that process from all these people. And then I like to see a consensus. I like to see all these groups come together and discuss these candidates and merits of each. And that way it's equal time.
Right.
Now that's not always
which
possible.
Which is not just more fair. It's if you want merit-based outcomes, right?
Exactly. And it blows my mind that companies aren't willing to invest in this. And I see flip it around to that employee who, due to attrition or someone getting let go, is now doing the work of 2 or 3 people. The sooner you fix this and hire somebody good, the sooner that person isn't going to leave themselves.
Yeah.
That's your ROI right there. You want more attrition? Don't invest into this.
100%. Yeah. And I think, I remember in our early days, a lot of companies, we don't see this as much now, but thought about, structured hiring as sort of like bureaucracy, or you're forcing me to, follow all these processes of big companies, but we're just a startup. It doesn't have to be. Structure doesn't look the same at, a Fortune 100 company as it looks at a startup. It looks different. You
streamline
what makes sense for
streamline
you.
it, simplify it.
How do you compare candidates apples to apples? How do you have consistent standards so that you can hire the best person? And it's such a perfect example of why, I push back on, any of these narratives that like diversity and inclusion are ever at odds sort of with merit. And there's a lot we could talk about there, but in example after example, you look at if all you're looking at, a set of talent practices with is a lens of, I want more merit-based outcomes. The things you're going to do, adding structure, adding consistency are the exact same things you would do if you're coming and you're saying, I want this to be more fair and more inclusive. Like producing more merit-based outcomes requires the same set of steps as producing more fair and more inclusive outcomes. And that's, I think, something that often gets missed in this discussion.
Right. So just a little bit of process, a little bit more thoughtful into what's going on, makes everyone's jobs easier. You're not chasing and figuring out. So I want to lift up the hood and especially get your perspective on DEI and B, political viewpoint, from the political perspective. Are we really are we in the danger zone of losing all the hard work that went into this, or was it for the wrong reasons? Like what's going on in your opinion?
So I think a lot of things are going on. I think a lot of things have happened over the past few years that sort of, have taken us to like this very complicated moment. But what if I say DEI to a room full of 20 people chosen at random, and I ask people, what does that mean? I might get 20 different
Mhm.
definitions. I think that what happened is in 2020 and 2021, in an effort to really demonstrate that they were aware of the cultural and social moment and
Mhm.
supportive of, Black Lives Matter and the conversations that were happening globally, companies quickly jumped in sort of headfirst saying, we are on board with DEI, started doing a bunch of stuff, not always um, looking at whether that stuff was going to actually make their organizations more fair for
Mhm.
everyone. But so a lot of the stuff was sort of the word used, like a little bit performative. Not all, I mean, not all things,
A
but I
little bit
think
was just to say they did it.
for some companies. And so
Right.
what we saw over the last several years was a large mix of stuff under this umbrella of DEI, hundreds of different things, some of which were highly impactful and very effective, some of which maybe were neutral, maybe performative, not that impactful, and some of which I think lost the plot and were not really about making actual workforces better for anyone. I think that third category was a small minority of stuff, but ended up often getting the most visibility because people were upset when they saw these things happening in their workplace, like things that were just totally performative, weren't making workplaces more diverse or more fair, any of these things. And so all of this sort of got combined under this acronym of DEI. And I think made it an easier target for activists that had
Yes.
been targeting civil rights work for decades, and made this acronym an easy one because we didn't have a shared definition across,
And
the
people don't even
US
know
or
what each
globally.
they don't know what
What does
each
each
one
letter
stands for.
even mean? Equity, especially. I can't tell you how often people tell me, I'm on board with fairness, but I don't like this idea that like each person in the world is supposed to get the same outcomes. I'm like, oh, that's not what equity means to me. So that's really interesting that that's been your, assumption, or diversity being about, just about quotas, which is actually not at all how I see
People
it.
fail to see that diversity also includes veteran status, pregnant women. There's
All
so
of
many
these things.
disabilities. They just think it's black and white, or they think it's just color. It's not.
Exactly. It's so many things. And I think, I just
LGBT. I
think
mean,
that
it could go on forever with what it also
total
includes.
caregivers,
Yeah.
mental wellness at work,
And
all
then
of
they're
these
like, "Wait a
things.
minute, that's me. I'm
That's
against it, but that's
me.
me, right?" Like I'm against it, and they don't
Exactly.
because there's no clear definition, and it was an easy one also for the people on the other side who were against this, who were the far extremists, to blow it out of the water, right? And you talk about reverse discrimination and using all these tropes and like thinking about ways
Right.
to light that fire and gaslight with it. It was just a perfect
Right.
storm.
Right. And those extremists have been at this for probably since
Right.
the history of this country. And they just, I think, because of how quickly DEI sort of dominated the national and corporate conversation over a couple of year period, I think it gave them an opening to create this kind of boogeyman really effectively. But what I will tell you is that when I talk to people across the political spectrum, even people I know who've on social media condemned quote unquote DEI, when I talk to them about the things that I actually have meant historically when I say DEI, things like, how do we make sure we are casting the widest possible net for talent so that we find the best people wherever they may be? How do we make sure we are building organizations where it is how skilled you are and how hard you work that predict how far you go, not what you look like and not where you come from? How do we try to create organizational cultures that allow people who are different from each other,
Hmm.
which is going to increasingly be true in this modern world, to come together and communicate and collaborate effectively? How do we make sure we have good policies like for mental wellness and parental leave and all of these things, support for veterans, so that people don't have these unnecessary hurdles to performing their best? These are actually things that are wildly popular. So while the acronym DEI, I think, has obviously come under scrutiny and all these political and legal battles, the actual core concepts of what I think most of us who've been advocating for these things have been talking about the last decade are wildly popular across demographics, across political lines. And so what I think a lot about is, how do we not get hung up on an acronym, and how do we talk about what we actually mean? And then there will be areas where we sometimes disagree, and that's okay. And we should welcome those. And those are the
Civil
interesting
discourse, right?
nuances, right?
How do we
And
do it
that's the fun
civilly?
stuff. But what we shouldn't be doing is, having these debates about an acronym, and then when we ask a follow-up question, it's like, oh, we actually totally agree. So what are we even, what are we even debating?
Hey everybody, Adam here from the Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the team at Fountain. Fountain is your full-service frontline workforce management platform. I have to tell you, Fountain's offerings are some of the most robust I've seen for any product in the space. They offer full solutions for hiring, managing, and retention. They are truly a one-stop shop focused on the frontline workforce. They also create informative content using their data. For example, they analyze a bunch of data from their fast food chains and created a trend report you could download now on their website. They also have a new ebook out called Frontline Voices. There's a lot to dive into. Certainly check it out. And you could learn more at fountain.com, linked in the show notes. Thank you. So and I appreciate your perspective on that. I mean, you literally just hammered off like the answer to like 8 questions I had going on. So I'm curious your thoughts. We're in such a multi-generational, so many generations are in the workforce right now.
Yes, 5, right?
I mean, it's incredible too. And when you think about like Gen Z's in the workforce and reshaping norms and expectations, what are you seeing it like how they are the leaders and managers of the future.
Yeah.
So how do we adapt? How do we understand different, like they value experiences over things. Like there's so many things in there about how they like prefer to be managed. And it's hard to make these kind of catch-all assumptions, but we kind of need to. In some ways,
right? They're like archetypes to understand, even if everyone doesn't fit within those buckets.
Correct.
So I think we have like 5 generations in the workforce, right, due to later retirement ages, and then within certain generations, like millennials, you have this sort of bifurcation of elder millennials and younger millennials, and they're like
Xennial
very
and
distinct.
Gen X,
yes, and they're very distinct sort of archetypes within each, and not everyone's going to fit into the archetype, but it is worth understanding all of the different ways that these 5 generations think about what a good workplace culture looks like. What does management look like? How do you want to receive feedback? What types of benefits matter to you? All of these things, as well as just like, millennials actually and younger are just a more diverse generation across a range of dimensions in the US, more racially and ethnically diverse globally, more likely to identify as neurodivergent, more likely to identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community than prior generations. So we have just like more diversity by virtue of having these generations and by virtue of what we're seeing in the younger generations. And I think companies that don't have a plan, or like a sort of strategy in place for how to navigate this over the coming 5 years are really failing sort of one of the most basic components of building like a future-ready organizational culture. Because you have to figure out, and the answer is not we train our managers to cater their style to each of the 10 people that reports them. That's not scalable, right? But how do we equip leaders and managers to understand some of these dynamics? We have in our learning platform, we have a bunch of micro learnings that cover different content. One of them is working across generations. And it's actually one of our most popular pieces of content right now because we're seeing people want to learn these different strategies. Like, I have someone on my team saying they want me to ask them before giving feedback. I don't feel like I can really do that. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, we're getting all these questions. How does that work? Which to me as well is like anathema as an older millennial. I'm like, I don't determine when someone gives me feedback. They give me the feedback and
when it's ready.
And then I go cry if I need to, or I do whatever. So, and I think I think each generation has these superpowers, and what we should think about is what we can learn from one another. And each of us has very annoying things that make us hard to work with. And if we can just learn a little bit about some of those trends and dynamics, I do think we'll all work better together.
I like how you frame that. Do you think there's a gap of management and leadership training that we're losing in some of these generational divides?
Huge
and
gap.
plus layer on COVID, work from home trends.
Layer that on, layer increasingly global nature of a lot of organizations. So now we're working across generations. We might be working across more time zones and cultural differences. We are working on hybrid teams where I've got one person sitting next to me in an office and 3 others that are in 3 different time zones remotely. And now start to introduce the sort of emergence of AI in the workplace and jobs being reshaped and cultures being reshaped and certain departments being reshaped. I think we just have this increasingly complicated set of variables that managers have to be able to wrap their arms around. Complex different legal regulations and policies in different parts of the world. All of these things make, I think, the job of management a different job than it's ever been. And I don't think most organizations are actually thinking proactively enough. Like, to me, training managers for this world that we are now living in and that is only getting more complex is sort of basic business hygiene. And I don't think a lot of organizations are still thinking about culture in this way as like a critical future of work challenge.
I think that we're at this inflection point. I work with a lot of different organizations and I see the breaking points. And I usually see the breaking points in the hiring and recruiting process. It starts there when they don't have their act together, when they don't have systems, when they don't have process, when there's when it when it's not a priority. When they deprioritize hiring, that's a red flag to me that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And most of the time right now, most of these roles are reactive backfills.
Yeah.
Right? I only have a couple of companies right now that are growing to the point of hiring. Generally speaking, in this economy, a lot of them are backfills or low-level growth, and they're not prioritizing. And I said, that's your biggest break point. It has to come down from the top. What how do you make that message clear to lead? Like, is it the data? Like, is it case studies? Like, how do you just hammer that into them? Like, I know it's not what you want to do, managers. I know you don't want to spend your time interviewing. I know it's not a priority, but it is for the organization and it should be for your team.
A couple of ways. So first of all, we spend a lot of time, and I spend a lot of my time, as do my co-founders and other folks on our team, with executive teams that, first of all, though, I will say we're biased because the companies that we work with, we're not going out and telling companies that don't care about this they should care. So we do have a little bit of a biased perspective where the companies we're working with are disproportionately already sort of in the top, quartile of they care about culture and they just don't kind of know how to think about it or what to do about it. We spend a lot of time with executive teams helping them think about the changing landscape and what it is going to look like for them to build a future ready culture. So a lot of that is just making sure your leadership team understands sort of the dynamics here and why this is a critical question for building a high performance organization. And then the second thing is, you said data, right? So we have a platform. So we call Paradigm a culture for everyone platform. And part of what our technology does is, we sort of have an AI layer that exists on top of your various culture data, your HRIS data, your engagement survey data, your processes and policies. And what we're continually doing for you is we're trying to uncover where are your biggest barriers in building a culture for everyone. Do we see on your recent survey that millennial and younger employees feel less engaged than others? Do we see that veterans are moving through your hiring process at a consistent lower rate? Do we see men are getting under promoted? We see disabled employees feeling a lower sense of engagement. So we're looking at all those things. And then we're comparing what's going on in your organization with trends from similar organizations. And people care about that. So we recently surfaced for a company the fact that organizations similar to that company in the last quarter had been expanding their mental wellness benefits. And this company was now off market with that. Now, we're not saying you have to go do that. That's data that you might want to have as you're evaluating sort of your culture strategy. It was very, compelling to this organization. So understanding what's going on in your organization continually, and AI is really, really good at that. And then comparing it to a broader set of benchmarks, that often will be a really big catalyst for change.
What's something you could share, just maybe a quick little story, like the biggest aha moment that the data through the use of AI has discovered for a company? Like, well, we had no idea that was even a thing, but we're sure darn glad that was pulled out, addressed, and we're working on it.
That's a really interesting question. So we only rolled out the kind of AI layer of our platform over the last couple of months. So I'm sure we'll see even more interesting sort of aha moments. A couple of interesting ones. I mean, they might not seem like that revolutionary, but one was around differences in sentiment by region. Yes, this company looked at things, often by a specific office, but then when you group regions together, you see a different level of insight. And then seeing that those differences also corresponded to higher attrition rates, right? So there's an actual cost there of having, lower sentiment. And we all know this, that think about culture, that lower engagement leads to attrition, but that helped sort of motivate the organization, I think, to take some of these differences more seriously. Another one, this wasn't surfaced through AI, but just through some of the analysis that we've done with our clients. This was started a couple of years ago. So this was an organization where they saw that Black employees and employees that were members of the LGBTQ plus community felt a lower sense of belonging in the organization than people from other backgrounds. And so we worked with the company over the course of like a year to figure out, how do we close those gaps so that everyone can feel a sense of belonging here? And one of the most interesting aha moments a year later, when we ran the culture survey again, was we had made a lot of progress closing those gaps. But in doing that, actually sentiment went up across all groups. So everyone's felt better about belonging. And we closed these
There's a
gaps.
halo effect.
Yes. And I think so much of this sort of, attacks on DEI are framed around this idea that it's good for some to the detriment of others. And what we consistently see is if you're doing this work thoughtfully, the story is more one of a rising tide lifting all boats. And so seeing data that actually bears that out, when we have that, it's just so valuable for our clients to really understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting and it's controversial. So I'm going to poke the bear on this one and talk about
Sure.
reverse discrimination. I mean, it's hard to tell unless you have the actual data. If you are a white male and said, I lost this job to someone who doesn't look like me, who I know I'm more qualified than or better than, that's a hard thing to say definitively. But it's a lot of companies went that way where they said we need to, for certain reasons, doesn't matter merits or not, we're going to hire someone of diversity. And I think that is real. I think that was real for a long time in Israel in a lot of companies. And now it's kind of going in the opposite direction. What are you seeing? What are your thoughts on that when you hear something like that?
Yeah, I'm sure it's real. And I'm not going to gaslight anyone that has seen that and tell them that it's not real. I don't think it's
I've
as
seen it.
common. Yeah. And I don't think it's as common as people think, but you only need to see that once or twice to be like, this is unfair. This is a big problem. I remember I was working with an executive company at a tech team end of last year, and a woman on the team, a woman of color on this executive team, said that at her prior company, she had seen a lot of that, where she would put someone up for promotion. And she gave an example of how she put someone up for a promotion who was himself a person of color, first generation college student, all these things that you are exactly like what create diversity in an organization. And the promotion was rejected because she was told she hadn't promoted enough women. And so I hear stories like this, and I'm like, I see why if you experience those things in an organization, you might be left with a bad taste in your mouth around DEI, because that is not fair. And it's so counterproductive to say you need to promote one more white woman because this person of color who's a first generation college student happens to be a man, right? That's not fair. And so I do believe those things happened. I think there were sort of lazy applications of the concept of diversity, sort of trying to architect or engineer an outcome rather than a fair process. And that's lazy, right? That's not what this work should look like.
Yeah.
But by the way, it has happened for decades in the opposite direction. Yeah. And so it's not fair in either direction that it happens. I think historically it's happened far more to the detriment of people from underrepresented backgrounds. But I think in this sort of rush to become more diverse, I'm sure companies took a lot of shortcuts. And I think that's a problem. And I think, but I don't think it's one we should overcorrect for. I think we should sort of stop building our talent and culture strategy based on the loudest voices on the internet, and instead ask how do we make our processes fair and consistent so that whatever is happening in the political and social and economic environment, we are doing what's best for our organization.
I absolutely love that take. So let's talk about your company for a bit. At this point, number of years in, what's the biggest challenge on the road ahead of you guys for growth, for what's next?
Well, I think so. There's a few. I think one of the biggest challenges is just, historically, this acronym DEI has been how a lot of people have come to us. People have been looking for experts in DEI and data analysis, or DEI and training. And that's a big part of the outcomes that we drive. And so we talk about ourselves as a culture for everyone platform. That's a term we use. It's not a term that people are just like Googling for on the internet. So making sure that the types of organizations that want to build high performance cultures that are truly for everyone know about us and know about how we can help them in a world where the kind of vernacular in this space is changing so quickly. That is one challenge.
Interesting. I want to leave on positivity here. What like, if you're looking at trends, what is putting a smile on your face every day in this world with so much awful news every single day? But what is one of those trends that makes you smile? Something's working. There's still good in the world.
There's so much good in the world. I actually think most things that I see
most things are good.
Put a smile on my face.
You only hear about the bad things.
Yeah, so in our recent benchmarking study, we saw languages changing. We saw certain types of high visibility and performative programs are changing, but we also saw that a large majority of companies say that their efforts that they used to call DEI are more embedded than they were a year ago. And so what we're seeing is this shift away from check the box performative type stuff and towards what we've been advocating for over a decade, which is how do we make this a core part of how we work? And the other thing I'll say I'm excited about is I think technology can help us a lot. I think it can make our jobs so much easier. So one of the hats I wear at Paradigm is I lead product. And so getting to play around with how do you do the right kinds of prompt engineering to teach an AI how to analyze data and how to analyze trends and how to do all of this to save a CHRO time. So at the end of the day, they just get to ask the fun questions. They don't have to go to their people analytics team and wait 2 weeks to get a response. They just get to think,
Isn't
how
it
do I want to
fun?
build a culture of the future? And it's great. And I think this work is just going to become easier and easier. And I see that organizations, whatever they may be calling it, are far more committed to sustaining this work than I think the headlines would lead you to believe.
How are you working with companies who are flagging that their employees feel threatened by AI is going to take their jobs?
I think it depends on the company. And I think organizations need to be very thoughtful in their kind of people and talent planning, because that's probably true in some places, but it's not necessarily true at the organizational or company level. So I think thinking about it more as a like reorganization, there are going to be some jobs, you might need a smaller team. Certain teams might become smaller because AI can do a lot of that. But what opportunities is that going to open up for growth of the organization? And what roles are you going to start to be able to hire for? And so I wouldn't talk about it at an individual employee level of like, your job is like definitely safe. But I would talk about how AI is actually going to open up a lot of potential for growth, a lot of potential for people to do things that only people can do. And I think that's really exciting. And I think we're going to see a ton of innovation. And I think organizations should be making sure they're, telling their employees that story.
And I think if I was to start a company or come into a company, I would have programs around upskilling, education, talk up
Absolutely.
about mobility, internal mobility. And I think it's a great question when a candidate asks me, Joelle, when they ask me, they say, what's internal mobility look like within the organization? Is there a lot of room for growth? I love that question. It's so forward thinking from a candidate's perspective. And I love to answer it for clients that I know that the answer is yes. Makes for an easy answer. But when there's a no answer, I have to be able to give a reason why they're still a very small stage. They don't have those growth opportunities. But it's a real thing. Candidates are really worried, especially, even me as a recruiter, I've had to upskill and change my tech stack and stay relevant. You have to stay relevant. And I think the word is invaluable. How do you make yourself invaluable at your position? And
Yeah.
that is by adding value, by showing what else you could do, what else you could learn. And if you create an environment where that's encouraged, acceptable, taking online courses, giving budgets for, continuous education, whatever you want to call it, but encouraging it by supporting it financially or with time.
I love that. And even in small startups, like I think often candidates and interviewers might think that this is all just about like promotion and the next job title, which you can't always get.
No.
We can't always offer that in our company, but that doesn't mean that there's not constant room for growth and learning and building your skills and making yourself more marketable for future jobs. And so I think this idea of how do you make yourself invaluable and how do companies allow people to continue to take on new challenges? I think most companies can offer that and should talk more about that.
Awesome. Let's bring it home here. And this is an interesting one that AI wanted me to ask. This is a question from ChatGPT. If you
Great.
could, I've never done this before. Joelle, if you could write the next headline about DEI and B in the Atlantic, what would you hope it says?
Oh,
First time, long time, ChatGPT.
yeah. Let's see. I kind of feel like I need ChatGPT to write
To
my answer.
answer
We could have our AIs talk to each other. I think it'd be something along the lines of like the future for DEI be cultures for everyone. That is a concept that I really like for thinking about how do we talk about the outcomes we're trying to drive in a way that I think most people can understand, can be aligned with, and that are so clearly relevant to what organizations are trying to achieve. So telling the story of the future and that the work will remain, but the way we think and talk about it might be changing.
I love it. And last but not least, I'm going to switch it up a little bit for frequent listeners of the show here. Joel, what is that single greatest piece of career advice that you have taken personally and paid forward, and why?
I think the most important kind of career advice that I've ever gotten is to kind of decide what you care about in your career and continue to ask yourself if you are getting that from what you're doing. And for that's going to be different for everybody, and it might be different at different times in your life. But for me, pretty consistently, having an impact is something I care about. I think earlier in my career, I was much more focused on, am I achieving that next gold star? Am I climbing the ladder in the way that I thought I was supposed to be? And now I think I've learned how to orient far more towards like, do I feel like I'm having an impact pretty much every day in some way? And if I can answer that question, yes, very little else matters to me. So if you can kind of figure out what that benchmark of success is for you, or like what is going to signal to you that you are, getting it right. It might not be that everyone likes you. It might not be that you're getting promoted. What is it that matters to you? And continue to try to filter out some of the other noise and focus on that. That's been very helpful for me.
I dig it. Well, this has been an exciting conversation. We could certainly continue this. Hopefully I see you in one of the next big events on the road. We get you in front of the live audience. We'll do it up that way. This has been an awesome chat, Joelle. Everyone check out paradigmiq.com. We're going to link it up in the notes, and they have a research paper on creating cultures for everyone. Again, that's in the show notes because I'm not going to sit here and read that URL link. But Joelle, where could folks find you? Where could they connect? Where could they learn more?
I'm on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on there. I spend a little bit less time on the site formerly known as Twitter, but I'm on there a bit too. Would love to connect on LinkedIn, and definitely would love to hear folks' feedback on what we talked about, on some of our research, and really appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely. This is good stuff, folks. And everyone listening, if this show meant something to you, leave a review rating. It goes a long way. Sharing means caring. You know where to find out more, thepodcast.com. Follow us on all the social media channels. Remember, be good to yourself, be better to others, and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.